Thank you, everyone, for coming to tonight's budget review session. Tonight, Monday, May 23rd. I'm going to pass it over to the city manager, who's going to go through some budget variable updates and resolution pro formas, and then a recap of the dialogue sessions.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the public and the staff who have joined us. If I can talk and share my screen at the same time, that's what I'm going to do now. God bless you. Coming through. So what, Judy Belanger, our finance director, is going to speak to the two slides here, and Judy, take it away.
Okay. All right. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, and whoever is tuning in and watching from home. Today we just have two slides just to go over some variables that we had discussed at the public hearing. The city manager and I had walked through the components of the FY23 proposed budget, which resulted in an estimated tax rate of $15.71. And that was a 68-cent increase, or 4.51% over the current rate of $15.03. At the end of that presentation, we reviewed three areas that we marked as the variables. So we've had some time to kind of look further into these areas and to see how that would reduce the estimated tax rate that we had proposed. In the first area is interest income. So this is a revenue, so it wouldn't affect the expenditure side or the budget side, but it would definitely affect the tax rate. So, you know, at the time, the interest rates, as we all know, have been changing and increasing, and we took some time to discuss with our financial institutions where these rates might be going. We are seeing an increase in the rates in our investment funds, and it is said that they're going to be raising these interest rates 5 times between now and December, that the Fed will raise those interest rates, and so that will affect our interest income. So we feel pretty confident doing our analysis that we can raise, currently we estimated that revenue at $180,000 for the general fund, and we feel comfortable raising that to $700,000 for fiscal year 23. Taking conservative measures, of course. And that would affect the tax rate and reduce that estimated tax rate by 8 cents, which is the first line on the slide. And that would decrease the median single-family residential home based at $478,050. That would reduce the estimated tax rate by $38.24. The second area is there's been a much discussion about the state contributing towards the retirement contribution, reinstate 7.5%. Well, that kind of failed, but there is a House Bill 1221 that the House and Senate will be voting on May 26th, but we're pretty positive this will pass. And what this bill is saying is that they're going to do a one-time state retirement, basically a reimbursement to cities and towns. So it wouldn't decrease the actual expenditures or the appropriations, because how they are working this is that they're going to go by fiscal year 22's actual payroll and then reimburse the city a one-time payment equal to 7.5%. So we'll see that as a revenue source coming in. So we estimate that to be roughly $650,000 for the general fund. So that would equate to another 10 cents off the estimated tax rate. And then, and again, if it passes on May 26th, that we're pretty positive about, it still needs to go before the governor for his signature. And then the third area is the Rockingham County tax. So we, as preparing the budget, we increased our appropriation by 2%. But as we have discussed, the Rockingham County tax is based off of 2 factors. One, the budget that the Rockingham County adopts, which they put together their proposed budget, which was an increase of 2%, but they have not adopted that budget as of yet. And then the second piece to that is the proportionment, which is based off our equalized value, and they go back to tax year 20, and the equalized value of each of all the 37 communities of Rockingham County. Now, we had currently a proportionment of 11.4% of that tax obligation, and we've had, the state had put together some preliminary numbers. They're not officially released, but as we're looking at those preliminary numbers, which could still change, we believe that we may have a $200,000 savings from our appropriation. What we do want to be careful about, and I recommend that we don't actually reduce the budget by that $200,000. When I go and set the tax rate in the fall, when those numbers are finalized is when the Department of Revenue will say, this is what your county tax obligation is, and that number will be factored into actually setting the tax rate. So I recommend leaving the budget as is, because nothing is permanent and it's not official. So, but it will be official at the time of setting the tax rate, and that will change. So with those reductions, that would bring our estimated tax rate increase to 47 cents as opposed to 68 cents. So that would be $15.50, or a 3.1% increase. And then on the back side, so taking all of that into consideration, I know there's been asks about what impacts to the single-family home or the median single-family home with everything included. So if the tax rate was to come in at 47 cents, that would be $223.61 per year, or $18.63 per month. And then with the 3% rate increase for water, which would equate to $8.40 per year, or 70 cents per month. And the sewer rate at 6% would be an annual increase of $53.40, or $4.45 per month. So as you can see on the bottom, brings us the total of $285.41, or $23.78 per month would be the impact to these three areas.
Thanks, Judy. So that speaks to the first bullet in the agenda. The second bullet would be walking the council through the resolutions that would be before you formally upon adoption of the budget, which we are proposing for the June 6th City Council meeting. And it's a lot of paper, but it's essentially the way that the budget is always adopted, and I'll walk everybody through it right now. The first one is always the resolution to adopt fees, and right after that one pager is the complete fee schedule. That's why that's so heavy. After that, it would be the appropriations for all the necessary general fund expenditures by department, if you will, and by fund. That's the total, that's approval of a total bottom line budget of $133,208,886. Following that would be separate resolutions for the water fund and then the sewer fund. After that, it would be expenditures of special revenues, debt service fund, and committed fund balance. Again, a requirement every year. And this year we have added the use of American Rescue Plan Act funds, or ARPA funds, to the bottom of that resolution, as you can see, along with an attachment that speaks to the items to be paid for using ARPA funds. And the last one for all of our requirements is a resolution approving the investment policy for the city to follow for the upcoming fiscal year. So those are coming attractions for your formal adoption on June 6th. And I think what's fair to say at this point is if there are changes to the numbers, we would need to know those in advance so that we can amend the resolutions accordingly. And then something that's not on the agenda, but we were scrambling as of 6:29 this evening to pull them together, was our compilation of answers to the questions that were posed at the different public comment sessions for each work session. As you know, the way our our procedure works. Public comment is where we can all take comment but not give feedback. And we wanted to honor the requests and the questions brought to the council in that time frame. So the deputy city manager did yeoman's work this afternoon, pulling them together essentially by either by theme or by department. So we've provided, and there are some for the folks in the room, and we will place this on the city website this evening. Answers to questions essentially, again, by department or by theme, speaking to IT, police, fire, school, general government. And so in the effort to be transparent and to try and respond to folks who asked a question, this was the work of this group. And I think the council mentioned that they would be supportive of that effort, so that was important to us to do. So with that, I would turn it back to the mayor so that each counselor who was responsible for the report out at the public dialogue sessions might be able to speak to those.
Thank you, City Manager. Just had one question for Bob, actually. Glad you're sitting up here. So on the June 6th meeting, can we notice I want to make sure everybody has time to digest this and also comment on this outside of the 3 minutes. Is it possible, do we already have scheduled, and maybe Kelly could answer this, do we already have scheduled a public hearing on the budget for June 6th?
No, because you had closed the public
Yeah.
hearing, but we can expand the public dialogue session, public comment session if you so choose, with
Okay.
a suspension of the rules.
Okay, so that's what we'll need to do in order to we'll suspend the rules and have, for all intents and purposes, a public hearing on the budget during that time.
Certainly,
Okay, on topics that are related to the budget.
absolutely.
All right, so Counselor Denton, do you want to, I know that you took copious notes of our budget dialogue, and I'll preface this with, this was the first time that we've done this, I think, in Portsmouth. Excited for it to improve, and was excited with the participation, but again, want to figure out ways that we can notice this more effectively to have more people attend, but I thought it was a pretty good discussion for its first time around. Councilor Dutton.
So we were at the Portsmouth Senior Center at the 7 o'clock session. With us was Councilor Lombardi. In attendance from the public were fellow veteran Sue Pelladora, who there she is, along with fellow former councilors Petra Huda and Esther Kennedy. And from city staff, we had both Judy and Andrew. We hit upon several topics of discussion. One was the $40,000 a year going towards the chamber, and the thought of the kiosk in the center of town should be for everyone to use, not just chamber members. Other thoughts that we had, outdoor dining was raised, possibly creating something similar to the Clipper Strong Fund, doing a partnership to help businesses that are not necessarily restaurants downtown. The Police and Fire Commission bringing forward step increases across the board was discussed, as was the IT department, whether it makes more sense to have everyone in the IT department be city staff or have 2 people essentially remain outsourced. And there were several other topics that were hit, such as the enterprise funds and the combined sewer overflows, because that was a topic at the last presentation. Overall, having done public dialogue sessions in the past, I thought it went incredibly well, breaking it up in different locations at different times. More attendance would always be nice, but it takes time to build attendance at things like this.
Thanks, Councilor Denton. Councilor Bagley.
Yeah, the person who was going to report out for our team is not here this evening, so I guess
She's running late. She'll be here momentarily if you want to go to the.
Skip us.
we could skip
third
and go
group.
to the next
Okay,
team.
we'll come back when Assistant Mayor is back. Councilor Blaylock.
Thank you, Art. Yes, I was with the pleasure of being with Councilor Cook and Councilor Tabor as well as Deputy City Manager, Deputy City Attorney Suzanne Woodland. We were over at Fire Station number 2. Mr. Mark Brighton was fortunate to attend. Fortunately, we didn't have any other attendees. Fire Chief Steve Germain and Fire Union President Steve Morris did join us eventually and helped answer some questions. Mr. Brighton brought up the mentioning of the stormwater runoff tax. We assured him that this was going to be looked at in fall of 2022. We mentioned that there were just many factors and variables to look at, such as equability, effect on nonprofits, cost, credits, pervious driveways, non-pervious driveways, parking lots. And yeah, Councilor Taylor mentioned the potential incentives for more pervious services and the cost of stormwater and how we could kind of allocate those costs to the people that are actually causing them as opposed to passing it on to the average homeowner. Mr. Brighton also then expressed his concern for the proposed 4% increase or salary adjustment for the firefighters and fire officers on top of a negotiated union contract that includes a COLA. Fire Chief Tremaine was we were glad he was there. He was nice to explain that currently Portsmouth is 7% behind the state average when we go look to hire a new firefighter. And that makes it very hard to recruit new help. When we can't recruit new help, those positions, we have those vacancies, they're then filled with backlog hours of overtime, which is more costly to the city, more costly to the taxpayer, less efficient, and more costly for all of us. This was explained to Mr. Brighton. He expressed that we need to get the word out. We need to express this to the public. He did want me to quote him that we sold him on that. The resident then also expressed his overall concern on the overall increase of the FY23 budget. He also expressed the concern for 27 new full-time positions. He asked if some of these positions were to recover from COVID, then why wouldn't they be temporary? It was discussed. Councillor Cook also mentioned that the welfare program was being underused and encouraged people to apply. I also expressed that we share these concerns and that there's a proposed budget and we're still working on it. And that was it.
Thank you, Councilor Blaylock. Assistant Mayor, could you deliver the report out on
Of
the
course.
conversation at the middle school?
Of course, at the middle school, it was myself, our city manager, Councilor Bagley, and Councilor Moreau. We had 3 attendees. We had former Councilor Huda, former Councilor Kennedy, and Sue Fedora. So we discussed a lot of, I think, kind of the same narratives that were discussed at the other forums. We discussed outdoor dining, the future of that, how to make sure that we have a fair and equitable system for all downtown businesses. We discussed a good amount of the needs in our schools, whether some of the asks from the school commission and the school board, the school board and the school department could be temporary funds if they're used for rehab for COVID-19 for our students. We discussed, we discussed better communication inside and outside, making sure the flow of communication, the things that, need to be communicated better to the general population are. We discussed some needs, including the need for IT, and a big discussion was on the new roles that will be played out in our new superintendent and the need for a assistant superintendent, and if some of these proposed positions should be halted until we have that new hire. That was kind of the rundown of that.
Thank you, Assistant Mayor. And with that, are there any questions or comments from the council? Now, I'll preface that with saying you have the budget now in a document, so if we can't make any amendments in a work session right now, but if you would get if there's any amendments that we'd want to discuss at the June 6th meeting, I'd ask that you would provide those to the agenda by next Wednesday, so that the staff, is that enough time for the staff, Wednesday to Monday?
Yes.
I'm looking at you, I'm
Yeah.
looking at city manager, but I was
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
Judy. Is that enough time? We can have our rules, so we can have it earlier if needed. Wednesday to Monday, okay.
Yes.
So if we can have those, any amendments that we'd like to make Wednesday of next week. But are there any questions the council has? Oh,
Can you just make it Wednesday at noon? The regular
Wednesday at
deadline?
noon. Well, we're not making any action, but Wednesday
No,
at
I
noon,
know.
so
I'm
yeah.
just
But
so I
Kelly's
can
the boss
note it.
when it comes to that, so Wednesday at noon, we will have,
Off the pot.
well, we'll have those, any changes, and obviously if there's something that you have already, happy to have that much earlier than that. But Councilor Bagley, you had a question or a
Yeah,
comment?
comment, I guess, and I think maybe perhaps I misunderstood the public sessions, but I was kind of thinking that they were going to be unrecorded, no minutes. We mentioned a lot of citizens' names tonight, which I don't think was an issue because they're all citizens that are actively engaged in city government. But I thought we were trying to make it more open to people that perhaps might not want their name out there or their comments out there on video. So I guess I would ask for maybe some discussion, when we do this again next year. Is the goal to do it as we did it tonight, or is it to do it in a more, I don't know if anonymous is the right way, but casual?
I think that the, a similar thought on that, but given the limited participation on that, I think going forward, we can just say, points that were mentioned, except where there's an example of somebody directly asking to be quoted, we can leave that outside and simply say residents and not list the residents they're intending. But again, that's not the goal of, I guess, not recording and not keeping or not taking minutes of that is more of a function of the fact that it's not it's a public dialogue and not a meeting. I don't think anything was certainly said at our meeting that wouldn't be also said on TV, but just a function of the fact that from a right to know request, we don't have to post all those meetings because they're dialogue. But noted, and before we have the next one, we can solidify whether or not we will have names or numbers of attendees. We could have stated that there was hundreds of people at these things, I guess, but that's a good question for the next time.
And if I could have just added a further comment, I thought the dialogue was very good, and it was very free-flowing, very back and forth, and I think you get that because nobody's worried about being quoted in the paper the next day, let's say.
Yeah, and I would agree to that, and I think that there's also just a subject to the fact that, I'd love to respond on TV to everybody that gets up on public comment, but there's limits to what we can do, with the rules that we have in this, and so, that's, I do want to stress that it's primarily around the rules of that, but for those that don't, that are, worried about being on TV or being misquoted or misrepresented, I think that's a good, it's certainly a good idea to keep going forward.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or any comments? Councilor Denton?
I have a comment with Memorial Day coming up. I just want to thank the staff for including the military discount for both the indoor pool and the boat launch in the budget. So, thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? And we just got these answers to the questions to the public comment, so we'll have to read and digest those. But for those in the audience tonight, I think we can, unless there's no further questions or comment, or Councilor Tabor, were you on the fence? Do you have something to say?
You got me. Is this a time we could share our thoughts on this budget?
Certainly, if you want, but it's not required. We will have a public adoption of this, but
I understand.
happy to entertain those comments at this time.
Well, this might lead to further work by staff. I don't know. I think the big story that we've got is the 27 additional positions and contract wage increases. And that drives much of our increase from 126 million to 133 million. The tax burden, this is all good news. through outside funding sources, we've been able to lower the increase in the tax burden pretty well. But I think my big concern is that a lot of the money we're using to offset the tax increase this year is one-time money. 3.1 million from the state for property tax give back, and then another for 400,000 for rooms and meals tax. And my concern is the rate of climb in our expenses when we get out to FY24. And on page 118, I'd ask we all look at that. There's a forecast for the 3 years. And when we get to FY24, the tax levy has to go up 8.5%. So we're not talking about $285 per household then, we're talking about 700 or so if you include the sewer and water. And I just feel that's too much. I think that's a big impact on taxpayers, especially when we know that the commercial property tax base that's been so good to us is going to turn and be less of a way of saving our residential taxpayers, because the commercial tax base hasn't been revalued as quickly as residential. So I would be looking for any ways we could come down, between 1% and 2% in this budget. And if those were possible to discuss, that would be my concern, and I think a valuable topic for discussion. At the end of the day, I think we can be progressive as we want to be, but we also can watch out for our taxpayers. An efficient government is good government, and I think we need to set that expectation as the governing body. So those were my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilor Tabor. Any other comments on this? Councilor Lombardi and then Councilor Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought the budget presentations were very compelling, and I appreciate all the work that everybody did to create such a comprehensive proposal. And to the Finance Department for creating such an organized beast to look at and read. I know some people came before us about extreme budget increases, including some of our past colleagues. However, I want to point out that the budget increase last year was greater than the budget increase this year. So nonetheless, our community is facing stress. And from the stress from the cost of living day to day, cost of food, gas, the cost of everything. And like our residents, the city is facing the same issue. I've heard from residents about this, and especially from seniors who are on fixed incomes and are living in the house that they've lived in for years and years. I, like John, would like to propose we do something to try to help the residents. I propose that we consider a reduction, overall reduction to the budget of $1 to $2 million, which is about a reduction of between 0.75% to 1.2 or 1.5% of the budget. I cannot assume to know enough about all our departments to make any line item decisions. Anyway, I think that doing so is beyond the role of the governing council, a policy body. And so in accordance with our goals of respect and inclusiveness, I would rather suggest that the city manager, the police chief, the fire chief, superintendent, make some amendments to their budgets in concert with their, respective bodies, their boards and commissions, and reach a budget that is pared down, just as our residents have had to do too. They've had to pare down their budgets as well. So that's my feeling on it right now.
Thank you, Councilor Lombardi. Counselor Bagley?
Thank you, Your Honor. So, reading the response backs that we got tonight, I'm noticing that the policy that we have is a goal of 20 students or less in K through 5 and 24 or less at greater levels. And I was wondering if we could hear at a future meeting a little bit more about how we came across the 20 students or less. My understanding, which may be incorrect, is 15 to 18 is ideal, especially K through 3. I've always calculated our school employee to grade levels by looking at the budget book and doing math, and but that's not as I'm realizing now, a very accurate way to do it, because you get administration, you get non-classroom teachers in there, gym, at the elementary school level, music, what else. So I was surprised to see that it's so high. So it would be interesting just to hear why we settled on 20 and if there's any science or data to back that up. I'd be particularly interested in the grades K through 12.
Mayor, we have department heads here, including the superintendent, so if
Let Steve come up.
the will of the council, we can bring Steve up.
No, I'm sorry, I think I said K through 12. I meant K through 3.
Little off on that number.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, so the numbers that you see there actually come from the teacher's contract. So those tend to be the suggested upper limits, if you will, and then there's also a reference to the state regulations, which have slightly higher upper limits still. But I would agree with your point, which is that that doesn't necessarily represent what we would say might be the ideal classroom, and we're fortunate here in Portsmouth to have most elementary classrooms in that 18-ish range generally. On the response to that question in particular, we look at class size and opportunities to reduce staffing when we could do so and still maintain at least that 20 maximum. So we have done that in the last couple of years in a couple of instances where even in reducing one classroom teacher at a particular grade level, distributing those students back out among the remaining teachers still yields classes less than 20. What we don't want to do necessarily is remove a teacher and then have the classes be a lot larger. And a lot, I don't have to get into all of the details, but a lot of it has to do with the instructional strategies we try to employ in our classrooms, a lot of small group instruction, a lot of workshop model classrooms, particularly at the younger elementary grade levels. And as you get into middle and high school, numbers distribute differently. So in the middle school, we operate on a team structure. And so those numbers in classes, you could absorb more or less students more easily in that environment because you're distributing students across all different subject areas of a team. And so you may have classes of 15 one year, but classes of 21 another year, and depending on which team it is. But in order to actually achieve a reduction of staffing, you'd have to have a substantial decrease in the population to essentially eliminate a team. And then at the high school, it's driven department by department and course by course. We do, so we make decisions whether or not to run courses based on whether or not we have enough students signed up for them. And then there's always that movement of students among courses they choose. And our classes generally hover again into that 20-ish range, but some will top out a little higher than that at the high school level. But yes, we do try to maintain reasonable class sizes at the elementary and our smaller classes at the youngest grades.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Certainly.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
At the elementary school grade levels, and thank you for your explanation, would the calculation, if you said the class size was 20, does that just include the primary teacher? Where would a para or a classroom helper fit into that, or do they not factor into the ratio?
Yeah, they're not part of that equation, Counselor, but they do factor in particular. So we try to lend support in the areas that are in most need, of course, and while essentially all of our elementary paras are driven by the needs of individual education plans, IEPs for students, we do try to make sure there's enough support in classes if we had to have particularly large classrooms. So case in point, we constantly get, the issue brought up, could we have just regular paras in, say, our kindergarten classrooms, which I think is a need that that is there. I wouldn't doubt it. In all of the priorities of positions we look to each year, we've been fortunate, again, here in Portsmouth to have kindergarten classes at a level that we haven't seen that as a critical need, and quite honestly hasn't bumped other needs for staffing that we've had. But that is a conversation that we have each year. But the numbers, the 20 or less, don't factor in the paraprofessionals that may be in the room, because if there is one in the room, they're tied to a student with particular needs.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Assistant Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. A couple questions for the acting chief or the police commission, if you don't mind. So in the request, we have a request for an additional crime analyst. I just had a quick question. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chief. A question on the proposed additional position for the crime analyst. Do we currently have a backlog?
Of what?
I guess crime that needs, evidence that needs to be analyzed? Is that what-
It's not
okay.
an evidence technician. It's a crime analyst would primarily analyze data,
Okay.
not evidence.
And then another question for the increase request of 2 officers. Has the department looked into seasonal staff for our peak season? I think of other communities like Hampton, and I know Portland does it, and some other seaside communities bring on seasonal officers during their busier times.
No, so I've worked for the police department for 24 years. That's never been part of a discussion. I think what you have is we have obviously a number of unions that are contractually obligated to provide the police services in Portsmouth. Having additional part-time staff added to take on the role of a full-time police officer, I think would obviously be a fight through the working agreements right now to supplement that staff. However, I will say what we do have is we have our auxiliary unit, which currently right now consists of 17 auxiliary officers, and those are not full-time police officers with all the benefits and salaries that come with it. However, they are sworn law enforcement officers who carry the roles and responsibilities and have powers of arrest and have all the same authorities as our full-time officers that do supplement our patrol force in the sense of outside work details, special event coverage. But they do not fill in on a basis of, like tonight, for example, if I had an open evening shift, we do not use our auxiliary officers to cover a full-time shift opening. However, they do supplement in coverage in those other ways, such as event coverage, special details, presidential visits, air shows, all that sort of thing.
All right. Thank you for that. I think that is all for me.
Thanks, Assistant Mayor. Councilor Cook?
Thank you, Mayor. I actually have a few more questions for you, if that's all right. One of the questions that I had asked prior was about overtime, because I know there were concerns, and that's why we were informed that you're adding some officers because you need to cover overtime. And we're going to a 5% budget line item for overtime for next year. What is the current overtime in the budget? Is it 5%, 6%, 7%? Do you know?
5%, I believe, Karen, is that correct? 5%? Correct, yeah.
Okay. And do you know what it is this year? It must be higher.
What we're tracking on right now?
Yes.
Karen would be better served answering that. I'm not sure what we're tracking on at the moment.
Okay.
Karen.
We're currently over budget on our overtime, but every single month we take a look at what our salary savings are. We don't fill hour for hour on our patrol staff. Basically, sometimes on a 10-hour shift, we might only have to fill 4 hours because there's a swing shift that could cover some of those hours. So we just basically, any of the salary savings that we have from vacancies or whatnot, I just make sure that we're not over that gap.
Okay.
So we still maintain doing a 10-year rolling average of the number of hours that we budget for. And so that's why it's still kind of consistent from year to year to year.
I have a follow-on to that. So have you done an analysis to look at where the cost efficiency is there? So if we add 2 officers, are we actually saving money in overtime expenditures? Because we're also incurring costs of health insurance and pensions with those officers that we're not incurring with overtime. At what point is that break even, I guess is really my question.
Again, if you put somebody, you'll hire an officer, they're going to be on a specific shift. You may have somebody on, say, the day shift, you put them on the day shift, and it turns out to be the midnight shift that has somebody that's deployed to the military. So there's going to be no savings in that respect, but on the day shift, if somebody had annual leave or sick leave or training or court, those hours would be applicable for the days that that officer's on. Remember, we're 24/7, so during that 40-hour period, we could plug them in that respect.
Okay.
So in terms of hours, in terms of savings on overtime, we wouldn't even see that probably for a year, because an officer's hired, they go to the academy, then they go to field training, and you probably wouldn't see anything probably for a year, maybe 2. So we would, again, that would impact our open beat section of the overtime, and again, that average would come down if we weren't hiring for so many open beats.
Thank you.
But it would take a little while.
One more?
I have one more, sorry. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand the need for the additional officers. So currently we're operating clearly without these additional officers. What, besides overtime, is driving that need to add officers rather than just restructuring the way that we are doing business?
Sure. It's a perfectly reasonable question. So I would say we're restoring, we're not adding.
Okay.
20 years ago, we had 71 officers. Our predecessors here wearing this uniform and your predecessors there agreed that 71 20 years ago, right, wrong, or indifferent, was the right number. So officers 69 and 70 is restoring positions that we previously had. I think in some sense, when you hear the number 68, which we have right now, people think that that's 68 people that are available to take calls for service, drive around in police cruisers. And the fact of the matter is that's not the case. The real number of officers that we have in the patrol division to take our calls for service, answer those 911 calls, is roughly half of that number. Because 68 includes the chief of police. It includes myself. It includes our administrative support. So the number of 68 can be misleading when you think that, there's almost 70 cops in Portsmouth. Well, it's true, but the number that are actually on the road taking calls for service is roughly half that. So calls for service from year to year go up, then they go down. We want calls for service. Calls for service going up is not necessarily a good thing. We want our calls for service to go down, and we do that primarily through detection, deterrence, and prevention. And if we had 2 additional patrol officers taking calls for service, being able to do those things, and combine that with our community policing philosophy, we feel that that's the best approach and the best puts us in the best position to be responsive of the type of quality of police product that we are accustomed to providing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilor Tabor, question for Acting Chief, or?
Yes. Question for Captain Maloney. We have currently 5 openings. Is that correct among our sworn officers?
That is correct.
Okay. And how long does it take to recruit and interview and background check, and how long does it take to hire somebody?
If we fast-tracked a background process from date of initial test to conditional offer to chief's interview, you're hired. Lightning fast is a month. Lightning fast is a month.
Because in the strategic plan that the former Chief Murner developed, he wrote that it took sometimes up to a year to hire an officer and screen.
A year till that officer, let's say from the date of hire.
Yeah.
A year till that officer is responding to a call for service is accurate. But as far as a year to, if we have a vacancy, and it could take 12 months to fill that vacancy, it could, depending on our applicants and the rate they wash out, and, who's in the process.
No, that's very helpful. That helps me understand, because
Okay.
I've been confused about, so in other words, you have to train that person after hiring, mentor them, develop them.
Correct. So after a lightning fast hiring process, which would be a month, which would be a record, that person who may have to go to the police academy then spends 4 months at the police academy, then 3 months of additional in-house training here. So that officer who was hired in January may not be on his or her own in a cruiser until January next year, provided they make it through all the training programs and prerequisites and all that sort of thing.
So I'll just pose another option or scenario for you. What would be wrong with, we're down 5 officers right now, which is a strain for your people because they have to cover that with overtime. But if we did the wage boost that's in the budget, the 4%, to recruit good candidates and concentrated on filling our 5 positions, and then, take a look at our overtime, take a look at our workload before hiring another 2 and going up to 70.
Fair enough question. If we were to get to 68 in a couple of months, if we were to hire for those 5 positions and we're full at 68, on paper we're full at 68. That doesn't account for FMLA, long-term military, sick, injured, workman's comp. We would never operate at that 68 and operate efficiently as we could with 2 more because of we never have 68 available officers and those numbers in patrol, that more like 33. We don't have that. So we've already forecasted that. We've already thought that same thing. If we had 68 officers and every single one of them was here and worked 7 days a week, but we know that's not reality. So which is why we're asking for the additional staffing, because, and I completely understand your question, is if we're at 68 right now and we're 5 short, why don't we fill those 5 and see what happens? We already know what happens, which is why we're asking for the additional 2. We know what it's like to operate at a full strength 68.
Thank you.
Any other, Assistant Mayor?
Thank you, Your Honor. To piggyback a little bit off of Councilor Tabor, do you think it's realistic that we, within the next budget year, will be able to fill all, if you are given the 2 additional roles, all 7 roles?
Yes. We have right now, for these 5 vacancies that we have right now, we have 5 in the process and 2 additional in case any one of those 5 wash out. So I wouldn't anticipate any issue whatsoever with filling 69 and 70 because of the amount of the tremendous work that our recruitment division does with filling the vacancy. So if we have 5 right now. There are oral boards virtually on a weekly basis to fill these positions. So we would not have any problem. Despite what I told you, our challenges with recruitment and retention, there are still people out there and we'll find them.
Thank you.
Councilor Denton?
Thank you, Your Honor. Captain Malloy, I'm just going to ask you this because you're standing there, but it's more
Should
a
I walk
question for, I guess, all of the department heads, for all the new positions, what the impact would be if we delayed some of them by 6 months. Past councils have done that just to have some savings for the first 6 months of a year. And I'm wondering, for the positions which you're requesting, what do you think the impact would be if we held off on hiring till 6 months from now?
Given the amount of time, as I just explained, to get somebody in the academy and get somebody trained who is non-certified, for example, so which you're talking about 12 months, that puts us out, doing that puts us out, 18 months, maybe 2 years from having that relief. However, that said, I know that that's been done in the past. And if that were something that the council ultimately decides is best for this budget, that is something certainly that we would work with. But again, part and parcel of that fact of we don't have an ability to control whether we're going to get a lateral transfer, which means somebody I can put on the street 4.5 months sooner than somebody who's brand new, or whether we get a lateral officer who can come onto the street in a relatively shorter period of time. Our preference would be not to, but I know it has been done in the past, and if that's what the council agrees is ultimately the best fit here, we certainly wouldn't say no to it.
Thank you.
No other questions? Thanks, Captain.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Any other questions for any other departments? Councilor Blaylock?
Thank you, Your Honor. It's more of a statement than a question. I want to, piggyback kind of off of what Councilor Lombardi and Councilor Tabor said earlier. That I realize we're all going through financial struggles right now with the price of cost of living, price of gas, price of food, price of everything. And we're aware of that. So I feel like as a council, it is our duty. You're the ones that elected us in. It's our duty to look out for you. So I do implore this council to try to look at any ways we can to try to amend this budget 1% to 2%.
Thank you, Councilor Blaylock. All right, with that, I think we can open it up to, did you have anything to? No. Public comment. Again, we will have, at the next council meeting, we will amend the rules to allow more than 3 minutes for the public comment session there regarding the budget, but 3 minutes in your head, in your heart, but there's no timer.
Do the best I can. So, good evening, everyone. Rick Beckstead, 1395 Islington Street. I would first like to thank the council for some of their, discussions. I think it's interesting. I think it shows a better case of looking out for residents, which is what you were elected to do. I'd like to give kudos to the mayor. I'm hoping that I can hear more of a dialogue moving forward when it comes to the IT recommendations, as far as with the discussions you had at the previous one, because you're right, outsourcing is one expenditure. When we take them into consideration, we have to deal with this retirement, with their pensions. I get it. Life safety, it's great. And it's really hard to go and tell the department whether they can or they can't. But what you have to take into consideration, and I'll use my wife as an example. So she's a teacher in Rochester. She makes X amount of dollars, period. And she gets paid pretty well. And COVID came and hit, and Rochester is taking care of them. But what's never taken into consideration is the package. My medical insurance and my dental insurance and everything that we have, the retirement that my wife exceeds her salary. And if you look at the cases in our departments, whether it be from the government departments, whether it be for the police, the fire, any one of them, you have to take that into consideration. The value is there. And I get it that we don't pay, as far as a salary goes, as high as, but as the captain had gone and said, there's been 5 positions for the better part of probably 3 to 4 years that have not been filled. And I'm hoping that they go and they fill it to make it easier on everyone else when it comes to that overtime. It would be great, but we don't have that. And please ask the questions of the fire department, because it's the same thing. I sat on a council where we went and we approved 4. They have not been able to fill, and it's not the fire department's issue or problem. It's a matter of being able to get firefighters that are come here. You know, I had the great privilege of serving with 12 other mayors around the state of New Hampshire, and when I was told what a firefighter in Concord makes, why in the hell would anyone come down to Portsmouth to be a firefighter when an average firefighter is making almost $100,000 a year? That's their salary. That's not their perks and their packages and everything else. So that's hard. We have to sell it. So now your job is to determine, working with the departments, on whether this is the best time. I like the strategy of 6 months. I like the strategy of maybe waiting another year to see what happens. Let's see what happens in the recession. Let's see if building costs come down, if gas comes down, if food comes down. That's our jobs. That's what we're supposed to do. Now, I have to explain myself because many people have asked me, and even Councilor Lombardi had gone and made a statement as far as with the percentages. And how does Rick come to a percentage? And you got Councilor Huda, that's a percentage. And we say it's only a percentage, and it's only $7 million. It's 10. And here's why. My council passed a budget last year of $123 million. And I'll use round numbers because it's a heck of a lot easier. And throughout the course of our term and in December, we did a one-time expenditure, $2.2 million, to do something good for the community that's been waiting since I was a kid for a skate park. We were going to use it. So we went as a one-time expenditure on an unassigned fund balance. So that wasn't money that was collected last year or the year before. That had been collected and pooled, and we put that into our unassigned fund balance. And that's one of the things, as Councilor Cook will go and say, that helps to give us our AAA bond rating. Now, when we did that, Judy from the Finance Department, we asked her, if we do the $2.2 million, is this going to hurt us in any way whatsoever? And in her mind, it really wasn't going to. We didn't have all the revenue. We still have revenue coming in, but it wasn't going to be anything that would dip below the percentage of what we've been able to yield for many years to give us this AAA bond rating, which is great. We can spend it. And it's in this budget. So if you take $123 million, say $2 million, that's now $125 million. One-time expenditure. Why is $2 million in this budget today? I'll take that a step further. This council went and took on assigned balance and took $9 million to pay out of litigation for a lawsuit. That was again added onto this budget. So in accordance, that's $3 million that was added on to my budget of 123, bringing you up to 126. So if you add the city manager's now $7 million on top of that, it brings us up to 133. Well, if we had 2 one-time expenditures, why is there $3 million built in this budget? Do we need the taxpayers that did not pay last year in their budget? They paid over a period of time, and because of John Bohinko and our staff and Karen Kennard continuing the process, we filled those buckets. The ones that we didn't use. We didn't use money from police. We didn't use money for fire. It comes back to us, and then we distribute it in the buckets. So that $3 million between this council and the last council doesn't need to be in this budget. It shouldn't be $133 million. It should be $130. That's how I come up with the $10 million. Please ask. Because if that's the case, and this council goes with the 1.2 to 1.5% reduction, now you're talking about doing something for the taxpayers. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Rick. Anyone else for public comment?
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. I want to thank everyone for a budget season. I also want to let everyone know that last year, on June 7th, we passed a budget of $123.2 million. And the city manager had come in the beginning of budget season with a higher budget. Councilor Huda and myself, we personally met with all the department heads to understand their budget and to get to know what they truly believe in, get to hear their feelings, get to ask some questions. And we were able to make some calls with the state, find out what was going on with our health insurance, make some other calls to find out some more information. But we were able to bring it down by 33 cents of the 60 cents that was brought forward by the city manager. That would have been an addition high. So I guess I am pleased to hear some of you thinking about this. And, you know, I know a lot of you ran on the fact that you want affordable housing. And when we keep adding budgets, you're not going to have affordable housing. I would like a clarification about the number of renters and the number of residents and the number of people that have second homes, because I think those numbers are off a little bit all over the place, because I've heard a couple different numbers during this budget season. But I think we want to make sure we have a diverse community. And by raising the budget by $10 million, again, on June 7th, 2021, we voted for 123.2. Right now, you're at 133.2. I ask you to dig a little deeper, folks. I ask you to look at those positions. I have shared, using my expertise in the field, on how we can use some of those federal funds. I, for one, do not want to see any federal funds go back to the state. And I would ask that you become familiar enough. I was kind of hoping we'd hear some of that tonight, because I really think it's unfair to the citizens that, I mean, we started to hear it, but we didn't hear any kind of how we're going to get there. We heard overall, I want to see a 2%, 1 to 2% decrease in our budget, but I didn't see how you're going to get there. So as a citizen, I ask you to tell us how you're going to get there. People financially are having difficulties. We know that. We have people that are seeing their drive to work cost a lot more. We know that people have mental health issues right now. I'm surprised that we're thinking of new officers and we're not thinking of mental health professionals working in the police department. That should be part of your thoughts. Our school population is going down. So what does that look like? You asked, Councilor Bagley, you asked some nice questions about it tonight. I can tell you that of those percentage of students in the classroom, you didn't ask how many paras were in each classroom, which would really look at the numbers of students and teachers and percentage of that. You asked about the paras. I commend you on that. But you didn't ask how many are in each classroom. So what truly is our student to personnel ratio? That would be the question. I also feel in our conversations, I thank you for holding the public dialogue. I was one of three, and I truly believe that if people go and speak, I like what Councilor Bagley said. However, I do think it is wrong to tell people that their comments might not be made public. If it's a public dialogue, you don't know who else is in that room. And it could be the press, it could be anyone, and their comments could be public. So I wouldn't want to give false information. I think when anyone speaks, it will be public, potentially. Just like when you comment on Facebook and comment on social media, it could be public. Lastly, I think that we really need to look at how our city is going to support the small businesses. I have said in the public dialogue, I've said here publicly, we do take care of our dining professionals, but we miss out on some of those other small businesses that are out there that are really struggling. And I would encourage you to think about how you can come up with a small business consortium that everyone can join. And people in small businesses don't tend to be able to afford or have the overlay, especially now, for the chamber. So how are you going to get their word out as a council? I worked on this, and I will continue to work on this. It's a struggle. Don't get me wrong. But you have $40,000 in our budget for the chamber. The question I have for you is, does that help every business? And I think the answer is no. I have one more lastly. Lastly, Mr. Lombardi, Councilor Lombardi, I just want to say our budget was low last year. Our percentage was lower than what you guys are looking at right now. So I would encourage you, if you want to sit down with me, I'd be more than happy to show the numbers. I just looked them up. But I think let's all put it out there and let's really look at it. Right now, we're looking at $10 million more, and I ask you to cut it. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
Good evening, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. Nice to see you all again. Tonight, I'd like to thank Director of Finance and the City Manager for explaining some of the variables, which all were on the revenue side. So I'd like to kind of hit the revenue side and how much revenue is actually coming into the city. And I'd like to see actually in our budget books or our statements where it's coming in. So again, I'm looking at page 129, and this is your revenues. The interesting thing here is in the budget books, we don't have any actuals for this year. So I went back to our last schedule of actuals, which is March. We're at the end of May, so I was looking for April, but March will do. And in some spots, basically the same spots that were questioned last year, we're doing really well as far as revenues, especially in our local fees and licenses and permits. At March, we should have been at 70%. We are at 90% of revenue. Excellent. We're coming out of COVID. The other questions I do have is where do we see our ARPA funds, our ESSER funds? I found a couple of things in here that I don't understand, and I know you can't answer now, but if somebody could tell me what the adequate education grant is, that would be great. We've got $3 million in there for that. And the last thing I would like to hit on this is in our budget kickoff meeting of 125, the Director of Finance had mentioned that we had a refund of our healthcare premiums again because of COVID, because other monies were coming in, but the amount of that was not mentioned. And I would like to know if that's reflected in here somewhere or it's reflected in our rate. We had incoming money for COVID that was put on our healthcare. We received a refund last year of somewhere in the 800s, 600s, and I would like to know how much that was this year. I would also like to discuss page 130. And my question there is, Councilor Tabor is looking for some revenue. In the March book on rooms and meals tax, we put in there for budget in FY22 $1,125,000. We are already at $1,639,000. So my question is, why in the budget for this year are we at $1,550,000? So if we're only at 75% of the year looking at March, can we bring this up a little bit? That will definitely affect things. The next question I have is about the appropriations.
we have a budgetary appropriation from the fund balance of 480, which, with my old hat on, I know that's for McIntyre. We have a new one in there for the budget this year of $1 million. I guess my question to you is, since I know this is McIntyre, since I know this is after May 15th, my question is, have we cut the check to Mr. Kane? And has he dropped the lawsuit? I see a drop in this for this year, but I don't see where it actually happened. So I know you can't answer now, but I would like that answer to that question. Also on the subject of appropriation of fund balance. As the mayor said, we started last year at 123.2 million. The appropriation was made for the skate park. And appropriation is basically setting aside of money that could be spent if you want to. I could read you the description that's in the budget book. But we have not spent that. It is not intended to be spent. But in our budget presentation here, we also have 3.214 million, as if this money was still in there. So I would ask for clarification on the numbers on page 130 at the bottom, because that money has not been spent and it will be moved out to FY24. So the perception that an appropriation will be spent there is totally false. So I hope that gives you a little piece of the other side of where the revenue is, and maybe more questions that can be answered in the next budget session on the revenue side. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra.
Mark Brighton, South Mill Street. I was given a challenge when I came up here to say the phrase $10 million 3 times before I was done speaking. And now, let's face it, $10 million is a lot of money. Excuse the hand signals, Madam Manager. Now, I did have the pleasure, that's not why I came, what I want to really talk about. I had the pleasure of speaking with Councilors Cook, Blaylock, and Tabor. And much of that discussion was around the fire department, because obviously we're sitting out in the fire department at Station 2. And the statement was made that they can't get right. Typically, in the past, when they would have put out a request for an additional fireman, or fire person, they would get 85 applicants. Now they're lucky if they get 10. And the chief believes that a good part of that is because the starting pay is crap. Now, I'm sold on that idea, believe it or not. But I've thought about some of the other things. I mean, it's nearly 8% based on what I understand that what it would need to come up to. But now, I don't understand why we are giving monies to every union employee, basically. It just, 4% when, I mean, if we're going to get experienced fire people in here, we need to up that starting salary. I mean, if you're getting 10 applicants and he washes out, I gather that they're still having problems, filling the 4 that are still vacant. There's a reason for that. So we don't really have to give out carte blanche 4 or 5% to, all the unions. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, so I'm sure I had something else, but I've forgotten it, so I'll spare you. But Petra, Esther, and Rick are correct. $10 million.
Thank you, Mark.
Good evening. My name is Liza Hewitt. I live at 726 Middle Road. I read in the paper that the increase to the budget this year will be $10 million. That's a lot of money, $10 million. You've had budget meetings where people have spoken asking for money, and you've had public dialogue where people have spoken who are going to be the ones that are paying the money. It's a lot of money. And I would like to think that my husband and I will be able to stay in Portsmouth. We speak a lot. Maybe you'd rather not have us stay here, but we would like to stay here. I'd like my children to be able to live here. At this point, one cannot afford an apartment, and the other one can't find an apartment. I would like my friends to stay here. I would like people that I don't know to stay here. I'd like everybody to stay here. But with what you're proposing, it's not going to happen. And I think that the ball is in your court now. Your court. You go back and you find a way to make this more affordable for the people that live here, for my husband and myself, for my friends, for my children. That's what you were voted into this office for, and that's what we're expecting. So please find a way. Find a way to make that happen. Lower this budget and find a way that you can make it affordable for everyone who wants to live here. Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. I want you to stay here as well. Anyone else?
Hello, Sue Polidora, Middle Street. And I just wanted to bring in a couple of issues. Some about the national economy, which is what I have been talking about in relationship with the increase that is being proposed. Heating oil is $5.99 a gallon. There's some people that need it because of the way their system is designed. They need it during the summer because it actually connects their heating or their hot water during year-round. Gas prices, I gassed up this morning for $4.98 for the cheap stuff, if you can call it that. Electricity is in New Hampshire is 56% higher than the national average, 56%. Now, it is not a 5.8% budget that you're proposing. It's a 5% budget plus oil, plus gas, plus electricity, plus groceries, which are now, because of inflation, being at 8.2%. This is an aggregate. It isn't just a budget that is in a vacuum right now. You say, oh, we're just going to create a 5.6% budget. Please take a look at all of these figures. It's an aggregate. Again, like I said the last time, you can't make a decision locally without looking at what's happening in the national economy. They are forecasting stagflation, which is inflation and also lack of growth. All of these things need to be taken into consideration. Also, last meeting I heard something that troubled me, and I thought about it a great deal. And one of the counselors called the city manager, please don't take offense, as the captain of the ship. And they will go where the captain tells them to do. I worked in the Navy. If you're in a submarine, the captain may tell you what course, but it's the helmsman that gets you there. And it's the guy running the sonar that makes sure you don't bump into things while getting there. So if that relationship, and I read the charter several times, that relationship is outlined on what the city council does and what city management does. City management, i.e., the city manager works for you, all right? When I heard about being the captain, so what does that make you, the elected governing body of Portsmouth? Deckhands? I mean, this relationship needs to be on the right place. I'm not saying adversarial, I'm not saying, go the other way, but you are ultimately responsible for what happens with this budget and what happened with many other things. So I just want to bring that to your attention. I have read the charter, I keep reading it. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm a historian, so I don't mind reading boring documents. But I want to clarify that for you. You are the governing body of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Buzz Scher, 390 Greenleaf Avenue. I'm one of the 3 police commissioners. I'll be pretty brief. I came to the police commission not really inclined to what I would thought would be growing the police department, adding police officers. I'm very much an advocate of finding other ways of doing the police department's job rather than adding the most expensive unit. I'm now at I've spent a lot of time talking with everybody, all the leaders in the department, the command staff, several patrol. What I know now is something that Acting Chief Maloney talked about. The 2 officers we're talking about are restoration. They're not additions. We have a police department that's been under a lot of stress for a while since it went down to 68. And it's going to continue to be that way because we're never going to be at 68 or 70 because there's in any particular day because there's always somebody on military leave. There's always someone who's injured. There's always some FMLA. There's somebody who's left and there's a pause and we need to add hire another person to fill that spot. And those, going down to 64 or whatever the number is, it continually puts stress on the department. And it's not a matter of we need two more officers to do even better. We need 2 more officers to relieve the stress that's on the department right now. This is, I can't emphasize enough, this is about restoring where we were many years ago. The department has come through a lot of stress, as many departments have, during the pandemic, and we just can't keep asking the department to handle that stress by moving things around and having people doing extra things. It's going to wear our people out, and they're going to leave. So again, restore those positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Buzz.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Paige Trace, 27 Hancock Street. I have a question for the city attorney, and I wonder how many of you have asked him this question. And if you haven't, maybe you should. We're about to, regardless of what you do with the budget is high enough, the tax rate is high enough, which is driven by the budget. So while I applaud Judy for trying to find things with the city manager to bring down the budget, it's not going to get brought down enough to battle the perfect storm of what's coming later on this year. Right now, every resident in this town is okay. We have tax bills due June 1st, but those tax bills are predicated on the budget that the council that I sat on passed. $123.2 million. Different time, different place, law of supply and demand, as far as housing went, pre-COVID, during COVID. So what happens when you have a budget that's very much higher, I won't say $10 million. I believe it is $10 million. I voted 123.2. The voted budget to the budget proposed, the difference is 10 million. That aside, right now, you're all okay because Roseanne Lentz hasn't done the very hard work of revaluation. And whether any of us like it or not, if you're sitting in a house that was appraised at $1 million last year, 2 years ago, and the house next to you sells for 1.8 million, where is Roseanne Lentz going with that? Now, the residents to date haven't figured that. I mean, they figured it out. They know it's coming. But when you have a higher tax rate, and then you have a huge revaluation, law of supply and demand, Portsmouth's wonderful, we all love it. Everybody else in the world wants to move here too. So when you don't have that many houses available or apartments available, what happens? Roseanne does her job. And I applaud you, Roseanne, wherever you are, for doing that job. It's what she's hired to do. But there are going to be more angry residents in this city, frustrated, angry simply because they're frustrated, because they're sad. They don't want to move. None of us want to move. We want to keep our homes. But how many of you here know what the taxes are on a house that's appraised at just shy of 1.3 million? Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's scary money. So if it's 1.3 now and suddenly next year it's where it should be because of a revaluation, how does the average person who's retired suddenly budget for that? So my question to the city attorney is this. If you have a mass quantity of Portsmouth residents who very truly cannot afford to pay their taxes, it's the perfect storm, and it's coming. How much does it cost the city of Portsmouth every time you look at someone and they say, I cannot pay my taxes? So the city then has to, I guess, eventually place a lien on the property. And then from the lien, either you try and negotiate something with the resident or you go into foreclosure. That costs the city money. And there will be a lot of those if something doesn't give somewhere. And you've got to realize that the budget that you want, however pretty and wonderful it is not going to allow that tax rate to come down far enough to offset what Roseanne Lentz has to do. I can't say it any further. Now, to add confusion, I'll say, yet at the same time, I know that the mayor, Councilor Tabor, because I've sat with you, agree that fire and police are life safety. The fire department isn't just about putting out fires. The fire department is about saving the guy that has the massive heart attack. If you only have so many EMTs and one of them's out one end of the city and the other's out the other end of the city, what are you going to do? You can't say, oh, I'm sorry, we should have had 5 more people on that department. But we didn't. So your father died, your husband died. It's life safety. And it's the same thing with the police department. You have a bad accident and you don't have enough police officers. You have a crazy Saturday evening and you got a whole bunch of people ODing and you don't have enough police officers and you don't have enough fire department personnel to make this city safe. That's the fact. So somewhere this budget has to give. There are a lot of items in this budget that have nothing to do with life safety. And I implore all of you, and I do expect a figure, if at all possible, from the city attorney as to how much it just does cost when somebody comes to the city and says, I can't pay my taxes. And I will leave it at that because that's a rhetorical question, and I know that I cannot have the answer tonight. But I implore you all to ask him also, because it's important. And you will have taxpayers in that position, and they will not be happy with you when the revaluations come out. I guarantee it, sadly, because I think you're all doing a pretty good job. But you don't have a choice in this one. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Paige. Any other speakers? Any speakers on Zoom?
No.
Oh,
Yep, there is one.
I do. Wait until the. All right.
Call it forward.
Can we bring forward Lisa Rappaport? If I can read that correctly. Yes, I can. That's Lisa's face.
Go ahead,
Hi,
Lisa.
everyone. Is my mute off?
Yes.
Hi, Lisa Rappaport, 139 South Street in Portsmouth. I wanted to speak briefly on two things tonight. First, I just wanted to take a minute to thank all of you on the council for taking the time to do so many different public budget sessions. I can see that attendance maybe wasn't as high as we'd hoped for, but you really do need to take the time to get that idea built up over a couple of years. I think it's a fantastic idea. And I think ultimately our city benefits the more opportunities that people get to have just face-to-face conversations and really talk to each other about how the money's being spent and why, and have those conversations. So I just wanted to say thank you for making that effort, and I hope that it does continue in the future. I did also just want to speak briefly because I hear so many people coming up to the podium tonight rightly concerned about where our economy is at. You know, I own my own business. I have neighbors on either side of me who paid way more for their houses than I did not that many years ago, and I'm worried about my taxes. But I do just want to take a moment to speak up for our teachers and our kids. Councillor Bagley, asked about class size, and when we're dealing with unprecedented upheaval that our kids and our teachers and everybody in our schools have been through over the last few years, we need that one-on-one attention in the buildings, and we can't address learning loss. We can't provide more mental health services. We can't address challenges with behavioral health and emotional health by cutting jobs or making classes bigger. So I just want to put that out there again, just to speak up for our teachers and our kids and everybody who's working in our schools, because it's true. We're all having a hard time financially right now, and the economy doesn't look great. But if we shortchange our kids, we're going to have a generation of kids who come out of our high school and they're not going to be able to contribute to our community the way that we want them to. So I just hope that you all can keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Any other Zoom participants? Any other folks in the room? Awesome. Well, let's see. Do we have anything else? No. It's just on to adjournment. I would like to thank, again, the departments, Judy and Andrew, for putting a lot of time into this. Ask the council to bring forth any amendments to the budget by Wednesday at 12, per Kelly's request and also mine.
Next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday, not tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but a week from Wednesday, so that should be enough time. And just a comment on the overall tax rate and budget. We're talking about the budget, and you'll see it reflected here on this handout, and hopefully this handout will be made available online. What happens to our actual tax rate if the value of the property stays the same? If the value of the property goes up, the tax rate will change to a lower amount to reflect that. That's not we don't increase the budget, and if the property values increase, the tax rate doesn't go on top of that. It takes into account the broader budget pie that we have. So it's an important thing. Remember, I know Roseanne's going to do her best there, and it's going to be an interesting, certainly interesting time in Portsmouth with the amount of focus on that. But that's talking about the pie, or how big a percentage of the pie that you have. The budget is what we control right now. The valuations are a separate, although related conversation. It doesn't mean, though, if the budget goes up and the valuations goes up, that the tax rate goes up. That's just not how that works. So look forward to future conversations and the council questions. And as always, if there is any questions on this, I want to thank the city manager and deputy city manager for putting this together. If there are questions on this or you feel as though they weren't answered, and you didn't have a chance to speak tonight, reach out to us as a council, and we'll be happy to look to have a broader conversation on that. But with that, I will adjourn the meeting, and go Celtics. Thanks, guys.